Alright, now for muscles of group 2. The first muscle we're going to talk about, still in the face, is this muscle that we see right here coming off the side of the mouth. This is called the risorius. This muscle pulls on the angles of the corners of the mouth here, so it draws the angles of the mouth laterally, pulling them out this way. That's the risorius. We'll talk about a couple of the muscles again that affect the lips. The first one is this triangular one here that you can see me outlining. This muscle is called the depressor anguli oris, and by its name you can tell its action. It pulls back down this way and it depresses the corners of the mouth. So this is your frown muscle right there. Next to it we have a very similarly named muscle, which I will outline right there. This muscle right there is called the depressor labii inferioris. This muscle right here, and it depresses the lower lip, pulls it down this way. Depressor labii inferioris. Remember that you had up here the levator labii superioris, and this is the depressor labii inferioris, and it depresses the lower lip. Two muscles that are towards the front of the chin here, you can see the bottom parts of them, one right there and one right there. Those are called the mentalis, and as you can guess, the mental foramens were right underneath them. The mentalis elevates the skin over the chin, so it pulls skin this way and it protrudes your lower lip. So that kind of sad face when you stick out your bottom lip, you're using your mentalis muscle. The last muscle that we're going to look here on this face is called the buccinator, and we see it right in here. Underneath the risorius comes around this way, and underneath it here, I'm outlining, is the buccinator. When it contracts, it flattens out, pulls the cheeks back that way, so it flattens the cheeks, and that's the buccinator. Those are the last muscles that you just need to know the actions. From here on out, we're going to be learning the origin, insertion, and action of each of the bones. Let's get over to the other side of the skull to see a deeper muscle. And you see this broad muscle that comes and covers the whole side of the head right here on this side. This is called the temporalis. The temporal bone sits right underneath, and it's named for that, the temporalis. Its origin, where it begins, is up here, further up on the skull, and in here. And they were called, if you remember from your study of the skull, the temporal lines. So that's where it begins, the temporal lines, that's its origin. The muscle comes down this way and joins to this front part of the mandible right here, which is called the coronoid process of the mandible. So here's the origin, and the insertion is right there. All muscles pull the insertion closer to the origin. So when it pulls this way, its action is to elevate and retract, pull back a bit, the mandible. So it elevates and retracts the mandible. You can feel this muscle on yourself if you bite down hard on your jaw and you place your fingers right here, your temples. If you place it right there and you bite down, you'll be able to feel this muscle contract and kind of pull up a little bit. So the temporalis right there. Origin is the temporal lines, insertion, the coronoid process of the mandible, and its action is to elevate and retract the mandible. Muscle that we're going to learn from on the other side, this is another muscle that does a similar action. So these are again more superficial muscles on this side. It's this muscle right here. This is called the masseter. Its origin is up here, and it's a zygomatic arch. It grabs both of the processes, so it includes the zygomatic arch. Its insertion is the ramus, this top part of the mandible, the ramus of the mandible. And it does a similar action to the temporalis, which sits right below it. So it elevates and retracts the mandible. Masseter, right there. Origin is the zygomatic arch. Insertion is the ramus of the mandible, and it elevates and retracts the mandible. Two muscles that we can't see on this model because they're way too deep are the medial and lateral pterygoid muscles. And for that we're going to get a new model here. On this model you can see a little bit more of the inside of the mouth. The mandible here has been removed and we see two muscles, one there and one here. Let's zoom in a little bit to get a better look at that. This first muscle here that kind of angles down is the medial pterygoid muscle, and this muscle that comes straight across is the lateral pterygoid. The way that I remember those is that the lateral pterygoid kind of looks like it's the beginning of a ladder if they kept coming this way, and the medial kind of looks like part of an M, where if you start here you would draw an M. The medial pterygoid begins, its origin is the medial pterygoid plate, and it inserts into the mandible. It protracts, so it pushes the mandible that way forward and elevates the mandible. So it protracts, brings it forward this way, and elevates, brings it up this way, the mandible. The lateral pterygoid starts here from the lateral pterygoid plate, and it inserts in the condylar process of the mandible. So if the mandible was here, it inserts towards the back of it, the condylar process of the mandible. And it also protracts the mandible, so pushes it this way, but instead of elevating it this way, it pushes it down a bit, so it depresses the mandible. And those are all the muscles of week 1, group 2.